Okay, everyone, I hope that we're all well. So, on this session today, what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain how to do the interpretation questions, which you'll get on the Russia paper, and then I'm going to set the next task in terms of the content. Okay. I've also found out you can do Moodle kind of outside the classroom. So I want to tippy tap up a Moodle thing as well and send that out to you all at some point this week. I might even do it today. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, I've marked all the source questions for the tutors, which you have done. I'm going to tippy tap another source out. I'll probably again do that today, and I'll send it out to you to be done, and I'll put on when I want that in. Just so we keep the practice up on those, because it is worth a big chunk of the marks. But anyway, this video mainly is about how to do the interpretation questions for Russia. And again, keep referring back to this video when you do some proper ones, probably next week. Okay, so just to reiterate, on the Russia paper, as you know, it's 2.5 hours long. On that paper, you'll have 3 essays, and you do 2 of them. That's section B, or whatever it's called. And then the first bit, there's a compulsory question, which is on historical interpretations. And the interpretations, it can be on either the reign of Alexander, Khrushchev, or on the provisional government. There's no choice of question. You can't. So one year it might be on Khrushchev, the next year it might be on Alexander. There's no kind of knowing, so to speak. However, the way they answer the question is exactly the same, no matter what the topic is. So, in that respect, hopefully, it should be fairly straightforward. Right, what you will get in the exam for the interpretation question is that you'll get 2 passages. I think they're labelled 1 and 2, doesn't really matter, and they're about half a side long, so they're quite chunky paragraphs. Okay. And the question on the top will always start off with evaluate the interpretation in both passages and explain which you think is the more convincing explanation of ... And then it depends what the passages are about. What you need to do for each of these is the same. So you have a little introduction. It doesn't need to be a great big long thing, but you just have an introduction. And in the introduction, what you need to do is say very clearly what is the overall interpretation. Interpretation is a posh word for view. What is the overall view of passage 1? It should probably be about a sentence long, I'd have thought, possibly 2. What is the overall view interpretation of passage 2? Which again would probably be a sentence or 2. And then you need to say which of the 2 on balance do you think is the better for answering whatever the question is. Do you agree with passage 1 more than passage 2, or passage 2 more than passage 1? Okay, you don't need to explain the interpretations in the introduction or anything like that. You're just saying passage 1 says this, passage 2 says this. Overall, it is clear that passage blah 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 is the better one for explaining blah blah blah. Okay, what you then need to do is whichever one you think is the stronger, I would do that one first. Okay, so let's say you think it's passage 2, then you would say, you start up, passage 2 has the stronger interpretation and its overall view is blah blah blah. So again, I just reiterate what the overall view is. Now, what you will find in the passages, because they are half a side long, they've all been adapted. In other words, they've kind of... They're from a proper historian, from a proper view, but he may have perhaps taken some bits out and added bits in from other bits of his book. So there's basically lots. I like to think there's lots of little hooks within the passage, lots of little things which you can then comment upon. If you want to think of them this way, they're like mini arguments. So you got the main big argument, okay, and then you might have some little piddly ones within there as well. So, if you look in your booklet, just to show you this, if you look in the interpretation bit, if you look at passage 1, which you've got, looks like this. It comes just after the emancipation thing that you did, the other lesson. If you look at passage 1, okay, it tells you that the overall view... By the way, the overall interpretation is sometimes at the beginning of the passage or sometimes at the end, okay? If you read it through, it basically says that no Russian ruler brought so much relief to as many people as Alexander II did. Emancipation was an enormous step forward. Now, the question we've put at the top here is evaluate the interpretation in both passages, by which you think is the most significant of the emancipation of the serfs. So emancipation was an enormous step forward. That is the overall view, isn't it, of this historian in passage 1. He thinks that Alexander did a great job of doing all this. Now, if you read that passage through, though, he then has, if you like, some little mini arguments or points, is another way to look at it. And these are like hooks, which allow you then to comment upon them. So he says it's a massive step forward because richer peasants could acquire land rapidly. Poorer peasants were selling their holdings and becoming wage earners. So in other words, it was great for the peasants because it meant that the more wealthy ones could buy more land, and it meant that the poorer ones could leave the land if they wanted to and become wage earners, i.e. work in shops and factories and stuff like that. Okay? Now it also says that redemptive payments were extended and finally they were written off. So it's almost like a little bit of a criticism he's made of his own view, saying, you know, there were these redemptive payments, but they were eventually written off as well, which makes it even greater in the long run, so to speak. So there's 3 hooks here which you can then talk about. Rich peasants getting more land, poor peasants selling their holdings, and then this kind of semi-criticism of his own view about redemptive payments kind of being got rid of by 1906. Now, what you would need to do in your passage is your first sentence, the overall view is, okay, you then need to be quite, it almost sounds quite arrogant, I think, but you need to use phrases liberally through your answer along the lines of the historian is right to argue, or this is an accurate view made by the historian, or the historian is not entirely accurate saying this. So you're almost like a TV critic of a film or something like that, where you're basically saying he's good on this, he's not good on that. The evidence supports what he says here, it's a bit dodgy on this bit, or it kind of contradicts him or her. So what you need to do is use these hooks and then say this is a strong view because. So for example, we said that the overall view is that emancipation was a massive step forward. You might then say this is an accurate view made by Westwood because, and then use some evidence to say and explain why it's an accurate view which Westwood has made. Alternatively, you might think this is a poor interpretation and you might say Westwood actually isn't accurate by saying it's an enormous step forward because blah 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 blah. Okay, you then need to use the hooks to kind of sustain your paragraph. You might say Westwood has also argued that it was an enormous step forward because richer peasants acquired land rapidly. Again, this is fairly accurate because they can use some of your knowledge to say why that's accurate. What evidence do you have that richer peasants did acquire land rapidly? Okay, or you might say this is an incorrect interpretation by Westwood because richer peasants didn't acquire land rapidly, or very few of them acquired land rapidly because blah 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 blah. To see what I'm getting at, so for each of the passages there's an overall interpretation, there's then little hooks which have been put in there which you can then discuss. You don't need to discuss all of them. I think I would probably discuss 3 of them, depends how much you write. Make sure you say things like this is a strong view made by the historian, this is an accurate view of the historian's right to argue, or the negative half of those comments if you think it's not very accurate. Okay, then you do a little summary at the end. Overall, therefore, it is clear that Westwood's view, blah, 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 blah. You might, and again, this is probably a good thing to do, and if you agree with Westwood, you might find there's something in there which you think, is a bit dodgy on that. I agree with him generally speaking about this and this, but I think that point he makes there is a bit on dodgy ground. And again, it's good practice, I think, to say, despite Westwood generally having an accurate view, he's a bit weaker when he says this, and then say why. So that just helps with your evaluation. So that's paragraph 1. So they're quite big chunky paragraphs, these. Okay, it'll probably end up being, well, it depends on how big you write, I suppose. It should be a good chunk. Okay, so then you do the interpretation you disagree with. So let's say it's passage 2 you disagree with. You would say an alternative view had been made by passage 2, which is this: the historian is inaccurate to argue this, or is wrong to argue this, or whatever, or the evidence does not support the historian in this particular interpretation. And again, you do exactly what you've just done for the Westwoods. So there will be little hooks within the interpretation, and you need to say, you know, whether this is accurate or not accurate. So if we look at the one in your thing, so passage 2, basically he thinks Alexander's reform wasn't very great, doesn't he? The state continued to be guided by the primary concern for the interest of the landed nobility. So he's basically saying that the reform wasn't great because the overriding concern of the Tsar was to protect the landed nobility. Then if you skim it through, okay, he has his little hooks in here. Okay, the nobility were able to reduce the quality and quantity of the land, which the peasants could have. The Tsar made abundantly clear his wish to damage the position of the nobility as little as possible. So we got two there, haven't we? So you then need to comment on these. Acton argues that the nobility were made to reduce the quality and quantity of the land which the peasants received. This is not an accurate view because evidence, or this actually is an accurate view made by Acton because use your evidence. Okay, and then the same for the second little hook we've got in here as well. And then finally, when you've done all of that, okay, oh, by the way, you'll probably find, because it's a bit of a short, this passage 2 in here, you'll probably find there'll be something which Acton has said, which you might think, well, actually, you know what, he's a bit right on that point. Okay, so don't just treat them completely black and white. You might generally agree with passage 2 and not passage 1 or the other way around, but there might be something in there which you think, well, actually, generally speaking, I don't like passage 2, but I think he's right when he says this, and then, so therefore you have to say it. Okay, but then say why the bit you think he's right on doesn't kind of dominate, if that makes sense. Why have you still rejected that view? And then the final bit you need to do is a conclusion. So overall, you wouldn't use the word I, would you? But basically you're saying, overall, I think passage blah, blah, blah is the better interpretation because of this and because of this. Although passage 2 does make a good point here, or is not very accurate here, I still think passage 1 was better because. Okay, so just to quickly go over it again. So you've got two interpretations. You're like a critic, a film critic, if you like, with two different films you're going to criticise or whatever. Okay, introduction, passage 1 says, passage 2 says, overall this is the better one. Whichever one you think is the best, deal with that one first. And so you basically say what the overall view is. You analyse each little hooks, okay, using phrases like, this is a strong view made by this historian because the evidence does not support what the historian says here. Do that for passage 1, do that for passage 2, and then do your conclusion. And as I said, within both passages, there will be something in there probably which you think the historian is wrong on or is right on. And again, use that as part of your analysis. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. So that's how you do the interpretation questions. And I said, keep hold of this YouTube. You can always re-listen to it several times if you can't sleep or something. What I'd like to do, in your booklet, you'll notice actually, there is actually like a little sheet which kind of helps to go over how to do them. So do have a look at that. And what I'd like to do is, you've got passage 1 and passage 2 here. They're quite short. As I said, the real ones you'll have an exam will be about 2 or 3 times longer than this. This is just to give you a bit of a practice, if you like, of the things to look out for. I'll put a question on. You find out the interpretation, which the more convinced explanation of the significance of the emancipation of the serfs, passage 1, passage 2. And there's 3 or 4 questions in each one. So I want to answer those questions from each of the 2. Okay, what you might want to do, I should really have added this in really, I think, as a question 5 or something, is what hooks can you comment upon to help this interpretation? So basically, what are the little mini arguments which the historian has made? I suppose I should have put that question in here somewhere. So perhaps a little 5 at the bottom, and just write in what are the little mini arguments. Or if you wanted to, you could do what I did actually. I only had one colour though, but I've kind of, you probably can't see, but I've kind of highlighted myself what the little mini arguments are in blue. You might do it in different colours so you can see what they are. So if you could do that for me, that would be grand. Okay. When you've done that, what I'd then like to do is, the next page says Consequences of Emancipation, Zemstva and Judicial Reforms. Use Evans and Jenkins 41 to 44. Evans and Jenkins is on Moodle. Okay, so I'd like you please to do those questions. So you've got 5 questions on the Zemstva. And so by the end of it, you should know what the Zemstva is and all the bits and bobs around it. And then there's 3 questions about judicial reforms. And again, I want you to do the stuff on the judicial reforms. So, do the stuff on the judicial reforms and the Zemstva. Do these questions on these interpretations. Do listen to my thing again about how to do these interpretations, because I will give you one to do probably next week, I think. I'm going to tippy tap out a source question. I might even do it in a few minutes, and I'll send an email and I'll email the source question, which I'd like to do as well, please. Yes, and I'm going to do another video as well a little bit later on today, where I want to talk about the coursework and what you should be doing on the coursework and where you should be up to and what you need to do. Okay, any questions, just send me an email at some point today or tomorrow. Oh yeah, and I'll also try and work out of this Moodle, which I think I can do it from home somehow. So I'll have a fiddle with that as well. So you'll probably get some Moodle thing as well. Okay, hope you all keep well, carry on with the work, and feel free to send me an email or anything if you get stuck with anything, and I'll do my best to help you out.